My dear chosen ones, something sacred was interrupted, and deep down, you've always felt it. You sensed it the moment their energy shifted, not because they changed their mind, but because something interfered with what the two of you carried. The connection between twin flames isn't ordinary. It's not just love. It's a frequency that activates something much bigger. And when that frequency begins to rise, forces that feed on separation, confusion, and trauma start to respond. Not all attacks come with obvious signs. Some come dressed as silence, as emotional distance, as someone you used to know, slowly becoming unrecognizable. This wasn't about choice. It was about manipulation. There was a force at work behind the scenes, and it didn't need to attack you directly. It chose a smarter strategy, one that used your deepest emotional bond to unbalance your soul from within. Your twin flame may have drifted, turned cold, or even acted against you. But what if that wasn't truly them? What if their spirit was pulled into a narrative that was never theirs to begin with? A spiritual distortion, activated by fear of what the two of you could become. And now, you're left holding a love that was never supposed to break, asking yourself if any of it was ever real. But if your soul still asks this question, it means the connection still exists. That's why this message has found you now. Because it's time to see the invisible battle for what it really was. Not a rejection, but a spiritual hijacking. And if your heart already feels this truth resonating, let it speak. Write in the comments what your soul has been keeping silent. Take this moment to like and subscribe to Being Extraordinary if you know this message was made for you. Because what we are about to reveal can set your heart free. Many spiritually bonded relationships don't collapse because of lack of love. They collapse because of spiritual interference. That's the part most people will never understand. You weren't just facing human decisions. You were being observed by energies that knew exactly how powerful your alignment was becoming. And when the light between two souls begins to open portals of remembrance, healing, and divine purpose, it threatens the balance of everything that benefits from confusion. So instead of attacking you head-on, the interference found a crack in the bond and slipped through the mind and emotions of the one who was most unguarded. At first, it didn't make sense. Their words shifted slightly. Their tone became colder, more reactive, less present. It was subtle, but your spirit noticed. You tried to reason with it. You questioned yourself. You blamed your own energy, wondering if you did something wrong. But the truth was, you were being pulled into a web that wasn't yours. A vibration had entered the space, something foreign, unnatural. It wasn't just a change in mood, it was a shift in timeline. The spiritual tactic used here was not to destroy the love, but to distort its direction. They didn't want the connection dead. They wanted it misaligned, confused, uncertain. They wanted your love to become your weakness, your vulnerability, your undoing. And so the bond was corrupted, not through hatred, but through dissonance, misunderstandings, mistrust, projection, until both of you started to forget the original feeling that brought your souls together. In the first place, you began to feel invisible, like the person who once mirrored your soul now only sees your flaws. Your intentions started being misunderstood, twisted, rejected. Not because you changed, but because their perception was no longer clean. It had been fogged by an unseen force, something that whispered lies while wearing the voice of reason, something that made them see you not as a soul mirror, but as an emotional threat. And slowly, they drifted away, convinced it was their choice, when in truth, they were being moved. This kind of interference isn't always what people think of when they hear dark magic. It's not dramatic rituals or obvious curses. It's subtle, silent. It works through pain, ego, trauma, past wounds. It amplifies doubt. It replays betrayal. It pulls memories from old timelines and uses them as weapons against the present. That's why the one who was supposed to understand you suddenly couldn't hear you anymore. That's why their heart began to close in the exact moment yours was opening wider. And that's when the inner collapse begins. You don't just grieve the person. You grieve the possibility. You question your intuition. You begin to silence yourself. You withdraw, not because you've stopped loving, but because loving starts to feel dangerous. And that's exactly what the enemy wanted, for you to begin fearing your own capacity to feel. Because a heart that doesn't trust itself becomes easy to disarm. But here's the truth that many never get to hear. What separated you wasn't love failing. It was love being targeted. And the more powerful the bond, the more precise the attack. You weren't abandoned. You were intercepted. There's a difference. One comes from rejection. The other comes from spiritual sabotage. And that difference changes everything about how you heal. There comes a moment when the pain is no longer about losing them. It's about losing the sense of reality you had, built around what you thought was sacred. You begin to question not only the other person, but your own memory, your own perception, your own soul. How could something that once felt so divine now look like confusion and distance? That's the trap. The real damage isn't the separation itself. It's the internal war it creates. The back and forth, the guilt, the silence after the storm. And when you're someone spiritually awake, this pain doesn't just live in your heart, it echoes in your energy field. You feel displaced from your own center, like a part of you was pulled out through the very love you once trusted. And so begins the silent battle between staying and surrendering. Your soul wants to hold the truth, but your mind keeps replaying the distortion. You remember their essence, but you're now facing their illusion. It's a kind of grief that isn't recognized by the world, because nothing is officially broken. There's no visible betrayal, no declared goodbye, just a shift, a pulling away, a sacred bond slowly poisoned by confusion until all that's left is uncertainty. And while others tell you to just move on, you're left wrestling with a reality your spirit still insists isn't over. Because, on a soul level, it never really ended. This is where the enemy works best, in subtle, emotional gray. Zones where there's enough confusion to break you, but not enough clarity to explain why. That's how your energy gets drained. Not through drama, but through the daily ache of unanswered questions, through the spiritual fatigue of feeling something that no one else around you can see. That's when you start asking, was any of it real? Did I imagine the connection? And most painfully, did I misread the entire assignment? But there's something you need to hear clearly. You didn't misread anything. You felt what was real. It was the interference that made it look otherwise. The tragedy is that your twin flame didn't see the distortion entering. They weren't trained to recognize energetic warfare. They were more emotionally open than spiritually guarded, and that made them susceptible. And so when the enemy approached, it didn't come through fear or threat. It came through old pain. It came through ego validation, attention, distraction, false peace. It promised comfort in exchange for silence. And little by little, the soul you once felt so clearly became entangled in narratives that were never theirs. Narratives that redefined you in their mind. Narratives that made you the trigger, not the truth. You felt it, didn't you? That moment when they stopped responding to your essence. When your words no longer reached their soul. When their eyes looked at you, but didn't see you anymore. It was like watching someone fall asleep inside themselves while pretending to be awake. They weren't rejecting your love. They were being reprogrammed by energies that couldn't afford to let that love evolve. Because, had the two of you awakened together, you would have created a frequency strong enough to break generational cycles. And that kind of power is always resisted. The hardest part is that this distortion doesn't look like evil. It often looks like logic, like new choices, like independence, like moving on. The enemy doesn't just use pain, it uses clarity that is artificially constructed. It makes the other person feel like they've finally found truth, when in reality, they've only stepped into a more comfortable illusion. And you're left on the other side, appearing as the one who's stuck, when in truth, you're the one who's awake. You're the one still holding the original signature of the connection, while they're trying to erase it. But even in that reversal, your spirit knows something deeper is unfolding. Because your energy hasn't turned bitter, you still feel love beneath the loss. You still see them underneath the noise, and that's what the interference couldn't delete. Your memory of truth. Your ability to feel what's real even when it's hidden. And if you still carry that clarity, even now, it means your light wasn't broken. It means you're not defeated. It means the connection isn't dead. It's just trapped behind layers of distortion that were never meant to last. There's a reason why the separation felt more like sabotage than surrender. It wasn't a clean break. It was a spiritual hijacking. Your twin flame didn't walk away because of you. They were pulled, redirected, and isolated within a reality that served the agenda of confusion. And now that you've seen it, you can't unsee it. You start to realize this wasn't just about love. It was about spiritual warfare targeting the one thing that could awaken you both at once. And in that awareness, a deeper truth begins to form. The disconnect wasn't meant to destroy you. It was meant to test the purity of your frequency. Would you abandon your light just because someone else forgot how to see it? What happened wasn't rejection. It was interception. If your twin flame had stayed connected while under the influence of that distortion, they might have brought spiritual contamination into your path. You could have been drawn into cycles that weren't yours, karma that wasn't aligned with your mission, emotional spirals that would have drained your calling. So the divine allowed the separation, not because you were unworthy, but because your timeline needed to be protected. You were rerouted for preservation, not everything. Sacred is meant to stay connected when one side is falling into illusion. This is the kind of wisdom most people only receive through deep heartbreak. It doesn't come through books or teachings. It comes through fire. And you've walked through that fire without losing your essence. You still hold the frequency of unconditional connection, even after being misunderstood, misjudged, and mistaken for something you never were. That is the real sign of spiritual maturity, not needing someone to validate what your soul already knows. You were loyal to the truth, not just to the person. And that loyalty to truth is what separates a wounded heart from a purified one. If you could see what was happening behind the veil, you would weep, not from pain, but from understanding. You'd see that their soul is still reaching for you, even when their ego runs. You'd recognize that they're not at peace. They're in delay, caught in loops, listening to voices that aren't divine, making choices that look free but are driven by confusion. And while you can't pull them out, you can hold your vibration so steady that when the illusion starts to collapse, your energy becomes a lighthouse, a point of remembrance they didn't even know they still had access to. This is why your role right now is not to chase them, prove anything, or explain yourself again. It's to guard your clarity like a sacred flame. The moment you start trying to convince someone who is under energetic manipulation, you enter their frequency. And that's exactly what the enemy wants. But if you hold your peace, if you stay aligned with your truth, the illusion can't hook you. And eventually, the soul trapped inside that false reality will begin to feel the cracks forming, the dissonance, the spiritual nausea. And when that happens, guess whose energy they'll remember first? You were never just a romantic figure to them. You were a mirror, a divine trigger, a soul-coded reminder of who they are beneath all the conditioning. That's why they ran. That's why the distortion worked so quickly. Because it didn't need to convince them you were bad. It just had to convince them they weren't ready. And in many ways, they weren't. But you were. You were ready to see what love looks like when it isn't about possession or control, but truth. And sometimes, truth has to let go, not because it gave up, but because it grew. You're starting to realize that the mission was never about fixing the other person. It was about remembering yourself. The pain of the separation cracked your heart open so wide that it made room for clarity you never would have accessed otherwise. You stopped chasing and started listening. You stopped questioning your worth and started honoring your sensitivity. You stopped replaying their confusion and started realigning with your own peace. And in that shift, something powerful began to return to you. Not the person, but the power. The more you detach from the illusion, the more clearly you begin to see the difference between soul connection and energetic access. Just because someone is part of your destiny doesn't mean they're entitled to your presence in every phase of the journey. Connection is eternal, but access must be earned through alignment. And when alignment is broken through distortion, your responsibility is no longer to the bond. It's to the truth. You become the guardian of the original blueprint. The Maz, one who remembers the song even when the other soul forgets the melody. This is why so many people confuse attachment with love. They think holding on is loyalty, when sometimes it's fear. But the deeper lesson is this: love that truly honors the soul must be willing to let the ego walk away. Not every reconnection is divine. Some reunions are just cycles repeating, in disguise. That's why you're being called to pause, to watch, to listen to the voice within you that doesn't need them back, but needs you whole. Because the moment you begin to choose yourself over the bond itself starts to transform. You're no longer the same person who begged for clarity, waited for closure, or cried in confusion. You've become something more refined. Someone who trusts silence. Someone who holds space without collapsing. Someone who no longer allows emotional access to those who operate in spiritual amnesia. That is growth. And that is what makes you dangerous to the systems of distortion, because you can't be manipulated through longing anymore. You've begun to anchor your power in presence, not in outcome. And this power is the very thing the separation was meant to activate. Had you not been forced to face this heartbreak, you might still be operating in emotional dependence, waiting for validation, searching for signs. But now, you've stopped, reaching outward, and started listening inward. And what you're hearing is not bitterness, it's wisdom. A kind of quiet strength that only blooms after deep spiritual pain. You are now becoming what you were always meant to be: sovereign. Not disconnected from love, but free from the need to chase it. Still, it's normal to wonder, will they ever come back? Will they ever see the truth? And the answer is layered. Some do. Some awaken. Some return not to restart a romance, but to restore a connection that needed to be purified. Others continue deeper into the illusion, mistaking comfort for truth and logic for peace. But the real question is, does it matter? Because the moment your clarity no longer depends on their return is the moment you begin to walk fully in your power. And that is the only outcome that truly matters. One of the hardest lessons in this journey is realizing that love isn't always enough. Not when one soul is growing and the other is hiding. Not when your light begins to expose the shadows they refuse to face. Love can open the door, but it cannot walk the path for someone else. And the longer you try to drag them with you, the more you risk losing your own way. Sometimes, love lets go. Not in bitterness, but in reverence. Because your path forward is sacred, and it must be walked with clean energy. And maybe that's what this whole experience was about. Not to show you how much you could endure, but how deeply you could heal. Not to take love away from you, but to redefine what love actually means. Because now you know, love isn't chasing, convincing, fixing, or sacrificing your peace. Love is truth. Love is clarity. Love is frequency. And when you hold that frequency, even in silence, even in separation, you become a living portal of remembrance. And that is something no distortion can erase. You're starting to understand what many never will, that silence can be sacred, and that not every closure requires words. Real healing begins not when someone explains, but when you start listening to the wisdom left in their absence. That space they left behind revealed your hidden wounds, the places where you were still waiting to be chosen. But now, instead of searching for recognition in someone else, you're remembering yourself. That's liberation. When love no longer means chasing connection, but choosing remembrance, clarity, and your own light. With that awareness, something powerful begins to return. Not from them, but from within you. Your intuition sharpens. Your emotional boundaries strengthen. You no longer offer your presence to people still negotiating with their shadows. You've dissolved old soul contracts that were born from fear or loneliness, and you now walk in spiritual sovereignty. You may still feel love, you may still wish things had ended differently, but you know now, love doesn't always mean reunion. Sometimes, love means release. And you, chosen one, are here to walk in truth, even when it hurts, without ever abandoning yourself again. And from this grounded wholeness, everything shifts. You're not the same person who begged for closure or waited for validation. You are the version that rose, the version that carries quiet power, the version that no longer needs words, apologies, or resolution to feel complete. Your rising is steady and silent, but undeniable. You're the proof that healing is real, that heartbreak can clarify, that separation can refine. You don't plead, you don't explain, because you now walk in the frequency of truth. And those who once misjudged you, they no longer have access to the version of you who speaks directly to God. There is nothing more powerful than a soul that has faced spiritual betrayal and chosen not to close. You didn't harden. You didn't seek revenge. You didn't become what hurt you. Instead, you became even more transparent, more discerning, more aligned. That's the mark of someone chosen not just to love, but to lead. Because the way you navigated this pain, with integrity, silence, and clarity, has activated a blueprint inside you that will begin to ripple far beyond this. Connection. Your healing is not just for you. It's for every soul that will encounter your presence from this point on. If one day your twin flame awakens, they'll feel it. They'll sense the shift. And they'll realize that the version of you they knew no longer exists. Not out of bitterness, but because you've simply outgrown the version of yourself that allowed access without awareness. You still honor the bond. You still respect the mission. But now, your peace is the priority. Your alignment is the altar. Your frequency is the gate. And only those who come in truth will be allowed to enter. Because love without alignment is no longer something you entertain. So if your heart is still, healing, let it heal without shame. If you still think about them, it's okay. That's not weakness. It's memory. But let that memory become a teacher, not a chain. Let it remind you of how far you've come, of how deeply you've grown, and most of all, of how sacred your energy is. Because if the interference tried this hard to keep you apart, imagine what would happen if you and your truth came fully together. Imagine what you're still here to build, to speak, to embody. Treat with or without anyone by your side. If this message echoed something you've been carrying in silence, let your voice be heard. Write in the comments, "I protect my peace. I walk in truth." Let the world know your light didn't die. It evolved. And if you feel called to walk this journey with others who are also awakening, strengthen being extraordinary by liking this video, making sure you are subscribed and activating the notification bell so you don't miss any new content. A special thanks to everyone who supports our channel. If you want to help us continue producing content, you can support us through Buy Me a Coffee, accessing the link in the first pinned comment. And before you go, don't forget to watch the video we recommend here on the screen or the playlist, the eDibe Secrets of the Chosen. Each video was made with you in mind so that you can continue growing spiritually. Thank you for being with us. May God bless you abundantly, and remember, your journey is just beginning, and the best is yet to come.